Olam chesed yibane, yadadai, yadai, yadadai. Olam chesed yibane, yadadai, yadai, yadadai.
My name is Heather Dorfman, and I'm a member of Jewish Voice for Peace Portland, and I am here today calling for an immediate ceasefire against the people of Gaza and to immediately let humanitarian aid free and open the blockade that has kept these essential necessities from the people of Gaza.
Could you tell us a little bit more about what's happening in Gaza and why we need that ceasefire?
Yeah. So the people of Gaza have lived under 75 years of occupation in what many people call an open-air prison. And in 12 days, Israel has just escalated the harm that they have caused to the Gazan people exponentially. We know over 6,000 bombs have been dropped. We know 3,000 people have been killed at least, and that many of those are children. Probably upwards of 40% of those people are children. And as many people may know, Israel has cut off water, fuel, food. People do not have safe shelter, even in what they believe to be a refuge. And people can't get out. 1 million people were told that they should evacuate, and they do not have safe routes to evacuate. So a resolution has been introduced into the House of Representatives called Ceasefire Now, and we are calling on Representative Earl Blumenauer. We're here at his offices. We're calling for him to join his brave colleagues who have signed that resolution immediately.
What in particular do you feel like you're dissatisfied with the elected officials? Is there unconditional support of Israel? Do you feel ignored?
Their unconditional support of Israel. It has allowed a creeping kind of courage among the Israeli government to continue settlements, to continue denial of health, safety, and welfare to the Palestinian people as they're required to do for an occupied people, with their granting financial support without tax repercussions, without being encumbered by allowing donations to the state of Israel through charities without tax consequences for Americans, with all the special privileges that Israel has, with that they're ignoring the fact that Israel has nuclear weapons and has never admitted to it. All of the ways that our government has given Israel cover.
Barricades and IDF soldiers line the route, and exuberant Israelis, mostly young settlers, march through the Palestinian streets, wearing and carrying Israeli flags and chanting in Hebrew, chants that loudly call out to kill all the Palestinians and burn all their villages.
Could you tell me a bit more about your personal experiences being there in Palestine?
Yeah.
How did that influence you and make you just feel over time?
Before I went, I was already very aware of the injustices and the history that I wasn't taught. That was why I went with the Center for Jewish Nonviolence. I wanted to do something. I didn't want to just read one more story about oppression and persecution. It's like, what can I do? And what I saw while I was there made it so clear that Israeli settlers, some Israeli settlers, not all anybody, but masses of Israeli settlers are teaching their children to hate Palestinians. And they're saying, we have to get rid of them because they hate us. When the reality is they hate, and since 1948 and before, we've been treating the Palestinians in hateful ways.
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free, free Palestine!
Free, free, free Palestine!
Free, free, free Palestine!
It deepened my awareness of just how much hate is being taught to Israelis against the Palestinians. And it also made me love Palestinians, like viscerally, not just a name on a paper, but I have images of people and children and families and beautiful, beautiful people. And the more I read about our religions, it's like they're parallel traditions. They believe in one God. This isn't about God. This is about a people, the Jewish people in Israel, claiming superiority, moral superiority, rights superiority to the land, which is obscene. It's obscene. It's not even in Torah. In Torah, as I recall, Abraham says this is the land for his future generations, not just part of them.
Cease fire now! 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 Cease fire now!
Would you say that you feel like ignored and abandoned by your representatives right now?
Well, right now I would say that many of us are calling and emailing daily, or even more than daily, and we are not, we're getting voicemails that are full, we're not getting responses to emails, and we see when we turn on the news that our president and many members of Congress are fully supporting Israel and Israel's actions and are not calling for an end to this genocide. So yes, I would say that we feel that our voices are not being heard when they continue to support such a horrific act being enacted by a state, the state of Israel.
Especially when you've had that personal experience, how does it make you feel when our representatives like Wyden and Merkley and Blumenauer, they give their unconditional support to Israel in this conflict?
I want to meet them and say, how are you coming up with that? What do you mean by that? What is this unconditional? You mean it's okay to murder people? I want to have a conversation with them about how this came about, how you can't get rid of the symptom of laws that create the problem. You just can't.
Yeah. Do you feel ignored by your politicians?
I feel unknown by
Yeah.
yeah.
Never again means now! Never again means now! Never again means now! Never again means now!
We cannot understand what happened on October 7th in the border area of the Gaza Strip without knowing something about the entire history of the Zionist settlement project in Palestine, the expulsion and flight of 750,000 Palestinians from the territory that became the State of Israel in 1948, the Nakba, the destruction of Palestinian society, Israel's occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip since 1967, and especially the siege that Israel and Egypt have imposed on the Gaza Strip since 2007, which has rendered the region uninhabitable, according to the United Nations and humanitarian agencies. But we don't have time to talk about all of that. If you have an hour or more, invite me to speak, and I'll be happy to talk about it. Killing innocent civilians, children, the elderly, men and women, is unequivocally wrong. It is a violation of international law and a war crime. It is wrong and unacceptable when Israelis do it and when Palestinians do it. Taking non-combatants hostage is also a violation of international law and a war crime. Hamas and Islamic Jihad carried out a heinous massacre of innocent civilians in over 20 localities surrounding the Gaza Strip on October 7th. And they took some 200 hostages, most of them civilians, including my niece and her husband. Such actions in no way contribute to the liberation of the Palestinian people. Revenge is not a strategy for liberation. Massacring civilians and abducting hostages make more distant the day when Palestinians will be able to enjoy lives of security and dignity and to achieve their just national and political and civil rights. Israel's response to Hamas's reprehensible massacre of civilians has been to massacre an even greater number of Palestinian civilians. This is in no way justified by Hamas's action. We oppose it unequivocally. Revenge and killing innocent Palestinians will not make one Israeli Jew safer and will not bring back one hostage.
From the perspective of Jewish Voices for Peace, who do you feel is responsible for this crisis in Gaza?
So ultimately, the responsibility comes back to the state of Israel, which has perpetuated this apartheid occupation for decades. Of course, we mourn and we grieve the loss and the attacks of the Israeli people that were attacked by Hamas. Of course, we mourn that. And we also know that the roots of that violence and trauma have been grown in 75 years of occupation. And the creation of the State of Israel, which was born out of the Nakba, which is the word for catastrophe, when Palestinian people were forced from their homes, were massacred, and that this has continued for generations. So we believe that's the roots of this violence and this trauma for Israelis and for Palestinian people.
I'm Israeli. I was born in Israel, Palestine, and immigrated to the States when I was younger. And almost all of my family lives in Israel right now, what is known as Israel. My grandparents, just to give you a little bit, to situate myself, my grandparents were Palestinian Jews, meaning that they're Jews who lived in Palestine before the establishment of the State of Israel, and on some sides of my family for a very long time, for 13 to 20 generations, before 1948. In the past 24 hours, I want to lift up some of what has happened because I think it's important for us as people who have the privilege to live in the United States to know these things. So the first thing I want to lift up is that the United States vetoed a UN Security Council resolution calling for a humanitarian pause on bombings in Gaza so that residents could flee and seek safety and so that aid could come in. The U.S. vetoed it, citing disappointment that the resolution did not make mention of Israel's right to self-defense.
How did you feel about the U.S. vetoing the UN Security Council action in the region? They were calling for a humanitarian pause, but we vetoed against that.
Appalled.
Yeah.
Again, here, there's the whole Arab world, the whole world looks at us and says that here we have a double standard. We require these things of all other nations, but Israel somehow is different. And I think we're very bold about saying that. Before we consider the claims of both sides or hearing the stories of both sides, we have already made a decision. The president has already said firmly days ago where our money, our military support, our diplomatic backing, where we stand. And he does not speak for so many of us.
So the third thing that I want to lift up that has happened in the last 24 hours is that a U.S. public servant named Josh Paul resigned from the State Department due to a policy disagreement concerning our U.S. government's lethal assistance to Israel. And I want that to stand as an example that it is okay and important for U.S. public servants to take risks on their jobs to save human lives. Not only is it important, but it's morally necessary, and it is your job, and we are your voters and taxpayers. And we are here to hold you accountable. So I wanted to speak strategically.
What would you like to see your officials do besides just sign on to the ceasefire agreement?
Yeah. So absolutely sign on to the ceasefire resolution and immediately stop sending military funding and weapons to Israel. Immediately send in humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza and ultimately work for the freedom of all Palestinian people.
I have Jewish friends who say that everything that is needed and has been needed for a settlement, a just settlement of this entire situation is already on the books in those documents, in United Nations resolutions, Fourth Geneva Conventions, International Declaration of Human Rights, International Court of Justice rulings. We don't need another negotiation, we need enforcement. And that's where I would like to see the United States government make demands for enforcement, tie it to aid, tie it to backing in the United Nations. We have a lot of leverage with Israel. We should have a lot of leverage with Israel.
So I want to name that in the next couple of minutes, I will be committing what I see as a wrongdoing from a moral perspective, and I'm doing so strategically. I will be speaking as an Israeli Jew about how U.S. military support for Israel is not keeping me or my Israeli family safe. Palestinians deserve to have their lives matter point blank, period, without regard for the interests of people whose lives are privileged by a powerful imperial government like the United States. However, I'm here to speak from my specific location and to interrupt 3 specific lies that I see being propagated by the United States government and media to use me and my family as justification for murder of Palestinian people. Lie number 1, that the interests of Israeli Jews and of Palestinians are inherently separate. That Israeli Jews and Palestinian people are separate peoples by definition. Israeli and Palestinian people are people who are being treated very differently by government systems and structures, by an apartheid government, by U.S. imperialism, by the United Nations. But there are people who were Jewish and Palestinian before the foundation of the state, and there are Palestinians who live in Israel and who have family members living in Gaza and in the West Bank. And you cannot inherently separate those 2 groups of people except for in the ways that they are being treated.
And lastly, especially coming from the perspective of Jewish Voice for Peace, is there anything you feel like the general public should better understand about this?
Yeah, I think the narrative, the kind of dominant narrative that most people have heard is that Israel is a place where Jews can be safe. And if you criticize Israel, you are somehow anti-Semitic. And I will say, as a Jew myself, Israel does not represent me or my voice, and critiquing Israel as a state is not anti-Semitic, and I don't believe it in fact makes Jews safer. I think Jews should be able to be safe wherever we are in the world, and that there doesn't need to be some special separate place for Jews. Instead, we need safety wherever we are, and part of the ways that even Jews can be safer is by making sure there's justice and liberation for all people. And so our destinies are tied up together. I think it's important to do more research and more understanding of the context and the history of what got us here to this moment.
Lie number 2, that the U.S. is keeping Israel or Jews safe. I am here to tell you a first-hand account of what it is like to be a person who has grown up inside of endless war trauma for many generations as a result of UN and U.S. support of ongoing occupation, land theft, and warfare. My father was conscripted as an Israeli young person to fight in the Yom Kippur War, and I know that this is very painful to hear, but I ask for people to listen. It is not good for me as an Israeli person to support the United States support for the State of Israel. My father went to war. Almost all of his friends in the war were killed, and I'm still living with the trauma that my father experienced in 1973. Fast forward to the 80s, my family were hiding in bomb shelters. In the 90s and the early 2000s, I was there watching buses explode. My school cafeteria exploded. A restaurant exploded right in front of me. We lost friends and family members. Fast forward to now, my 2 baby cousins who are Israelis in their young 20s and late teens are being conscripted to go into Gaza and fight a war that, frankly, I don't think that they believe in, and they should not be in that position. And again, I'm saying I'm committing a complicated moral injury by not centering Palestinians, but the reason I'm doing that is specific and strategic. It is not protecting my family for the United States government to fund land theft and occupation. It is putting us in an endless cycle of war, violence, and devastation as a result of necessary Palestinian resistance to what is happening now, fast forward now, where in our names, as Israelis, as Jews, and as American citizens who pay taxes, there are millions of people in Gaza who have not had water to drink in 13 days. 13 days. There are 1.1 million people in Gaza who, in our names, have been relocating from the north of Gaza to the south, which I believe is in preparation for the Israeli government, with American support, to engage in a furthering of Nakba and a furthering of land theft, to send Palestinians into Egypt, into the Sinai Peninsula, to displace them from their homes once again, only a few generations later, so that the United States can have a strategic stronghold in the region, so that the United States can continue to kill Arab peoples all over the region, so that the United States can continue to profit from the oil industry by having a stronghold in the region. And I say no to death being done in our names. And I say to elected officials that are here to serve us, please take a risk on your job so that we don't lose thousands of more people in the next 24 hours. Every 15 minutes in Gaza, a child has been murdered in the last 24 hours. Every 15 minutes matters. So thank you for being here, and we hope that you hear our cries.